Little kittens keep following a dog for help. But when the dog finally realizes why, she bursts into tears. At first, it looks like an ordinary rescue. Tiny, fragile kittens clinging desperately to a dog who doesn't understand their strange devotion. But soon, the truth begins to surface, and it's far darker than anyone could have imagined. Each step these kittens take uncovers a hidden past, a secret so shocking it threatens to destroy everything the dog and her owner have fought to rebuild. Why would these helpless kittens choose her? And what terrible secret connects them in ways no one expected? When the truth finally falls into the light, it will leave you questioning loyalty, survival, and the meaning of family. What were the kittens trying to reveal all along? And can the truth be faced before it's too late? Your comments and presence here remind me why I tell these stories. If you still believe in the healing strength of love, truth, and quiet courage, then you're the reason this channel exists. The autumn wind whispered through the trees as Lydia Markham stood on her cabin's wraparound porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Her new companion, Bailey, pressed against her leg, the German Shepherd mix's muscular body trembling slightly despite the mild temperature. Lydia reached down to scratch behind Bailey's ears, noting how the dog still flinched at sudden movements, even after 3 weeks in her care. "It's okay, girl," Lydia murmured, her voice soft and steady. "You're safe here." The cabin, nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering pines, had become Lydia's sanctuary 5 years ago when she'd left her prestigious research position at the university. The choice had raised eyebrows among her colleagues, but Lydia had never regretted trading her laboratory for this peaceful haven where she could truly help animals in need. Inside, Lydia's home reflected her dedication to animal rehabilitation. Comfortable furniture shared space with specially designed ramps and cushioned beds. Natural light streamed through large windows, creating a warm and welcoming atmosphere. The walls held framed photographs of success stories, animals she'd helped heal and rehome over the years. Bailey had been different from the start. The shelter had called Lydia specifically, knowing her expertise with traumatized animals. When she'd first seen Bailey huddled in the corner of her kennel, those intelligent eyes had captured Lydia's heart immediately. The dog's medical report told a story of neglect and probable abuse, with scarring that suggested she'd been used for breeding. "Ready for our evening walk?" Lydia asked, reaching for the leash hanging by the door. Bailey's ears perked up, though. Her tail remained low, a subtle sign of her ongoing recovery. The dog had made progress, but certain triggers still caused her to shut down completely, particularly anything resembling a cage or enclosed space. They set out along their usual trail, the packed earth soft beneath their feet. Lydia had chosen this property specifically for its location, bordering hundreds of acres of protected woodland. The isolation suited both her work and her personality. She'd always preferred the company of animals to most humans. About 15 minutes into their walk, Bailey suddenly froze. Her ears shot forward and her body tensed. Lydia had learned to trust her dog's instincts, so she stopped and watched carefully. "What is it, girl?" Bailey's nose worked the air, and then she pulled forward with unprecedented urgency. Lydia, surprised by the usually hesitant dog's determination, allowed herself to be led off their familiar path. They pushed through a cluster of wild raspberry bushes, their branches nearly bare now that autumn was settling in. "Easy there," Lydia cautioned as Bailey's pace quickened. The dog wasn't running, but moving with focused intensity, pausing occasionally to ensure Lydia was following. They'd never ventured this far off the trail before. The trees grew denser here, and Lydia had to duck under low-hanging branches. Her boots crunched through fallen leaves, the sound seeming unnaturally loud in the hushed forest. The sun was sinking, faster now, the woods growing darker by the minute. Bailey led them to a small clearing, where she stopped so abruptly that Lydia nearly stumbled. The dog's body language had changed completely. She was rigid, trembling, but not with fear. It was more like recognition, mixed with anxiety. "Bailey?" Lydia whispered, concerned by her dog's obvious distress. A rustle in the undergrowth caught their attention. Bailey whined, a high-pitched sound Lydia had never heard her make before. Then, from between the roots of an ancient oak tree, two tiny shapes emerged. Lydia blinked in disbelief. Kittens, barely old enough to be away from their mother, crept toward them. Their fur was a unique silver gray, almost luminescent in the fading light. But it was their behavior that made Lydia's breath catch in her throat. The kittens moved with singular purpose, making straight for Bailey. The dog, who normally showed nervous aggression toward cats, stood perfectly still as the two little ones approached. They pressed themselves against her legs, their high-pitched mews filling the clearing. "That's unusual," Lydia muttered, crouching down to observe the strange interaction. The kittens seemed desperate for Bailey's attention, while the dog appeared, caught between instinct and memory. Her muscles trembled with tension, but she made no move to escape or chase the kittens away. Lydia's trained eye noted every detail. The kittens were too well fed to be feral, too clean to have been living in the woods for long. Their unusual coloring suggested a specific breed, not the typical strays found in this area. And their behavior, their absolute fixation on Bailey, spoke of something more than random encounter. "Where did you come from, little ones?" Lydia reached out slowly, letting the kittens sniff her fingers. They allowed her touch, but immediately returned their attention to Bailey, rubbing against the dog's legs and trying to climb up her sides. Bailey looked at Lydia with an expression that seemed almost pleading. The dog's usual fearfulness had been replaced by something else, a desperate sort of recognition that made Lydia's heart ache. She'd seen that look before, in mother animals separated from their young. The sun had nearly set now, painting long shadows across the clearing. The temperature was dropping quickly, and Lydia knew she couldn't leave the kittens out here alone. Whatever mystery surrounded their appearance would have to wait until morning. "Okay, everyone," she said softly, shrugging off her light jacket. "Let's get you somewhere safe." The kittens didn't protest when she gathered them in her jacket, creating a makeshift carrier. If anything, they seemed relieved, especially since they could still see Bailey. The dog stayed close as they made their way back toward the cabin, turning frequently to check on the tiny passengers. Lydia's mind raced with questions. Her years of experience told her this was no ordinary case of abandoned pets. The kittens' reaction to Bailey and Bailey's response to them suggested a connection, one that possibly tied into the dog's troubled past. Back at the cabin, Lydia settled the kittens into a soft-sided carrier in the living room, making sure they had water, food, and a small litter box. Bailey refused to leave their side, lying down next to the carrier with her nose pressed against the mesh window. "What's your story?" Lydia wondered aloud, watching as Bailey gently nuzzled each kitten through the carrier's opening. The dog's entire demeanor had transformed. The fearful, hesitant rescue animal was now focused and protective, though still clearly troubled. Lydia settled into her favorite armchair, a worn leather piece that had witnessed countless hours of animal rehabilitation. She pulled out her notebook, the one where she documented each case that came into her care. As she began to write, recording every detail of this strange evening, she couldn't shake the feeling that these kittens were more than just lost pets. Bailey's reaction was too specific, too emotional. The dog's history of likely being used for breeding, combined with her response to these particular kittens, hinted at something darker. Lydia had seen enough cases of animal exploitation to recognize the signs of something systematic rather than accidental. The kittens had finally drifted off to sleep, their tiny bodies curled together in a perfect silver circle. Bailey maintained her vigil, her eyes heavy but refusing to close. Every few minutes, she would lift her head to check on her charges, then lay back down with a deep sigh. Lydia watched this cycle repeat several times, her trained mind cataloging every behavior, every reaction. Her initial wonder at the strange encounter was slowly being replaced by a growing sense of purpose. These animals had found their way to her for a reason, and she was determined to uncover the truth behind their connection. The clock on the mantel struck 9 o'clock, its soft chimes echoing through the quiet cabin. Outside, the woods had fallen into darkness. But inside, in the warm glow of lamplight, a new family was forming. Unlikely as it seemed, these three creatures had found each other, and in doing so, they'd found their way to Lydia. She knew from experience that healing took time, that trust had to be earned, and patience was essential. But watching Bailey's protective posture, seeing how the kittens responded to her presence, Lydia felt a surge of hope. Whatever circumstances had brought these animals together, whatever mysteries still needed to be unraveled, she would help them through it. The night settled around the cabin like a soft blanket, bringing with it a sense of possibility. Lydia made one final check on her charges before heading to bed, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and, hopefully, some answers. But, for now, in this moment, they were safe. They were together. And that was enough. Lydia watched the peculiar scene unfold before her, her trained eye picking up every nuance of Bailey's behavior. At first glance, it seemed like simple protective instinct, a common enough response she'd seen in rescue dogs, especially those with maternal histories. But there was something different here, something that made her professional certainty waver. Bailey's powerful frame trembled as she stood over the kittens, her eyes wide with what Lydia could only describe as recognition. The dog's legs, suddenly, gave way, and she collapsed beside the tiny felines, her whole body shaking uncontrollably. The kittens, undeterred by her distress, pressed their small bodies against her, purring loudly enough for Lydia to hear from where she stood. "Easy, girl," Lydia murmured, keeping her voice low and steady despite the growing unease in her chest. She'd worked with traumatized animals for years, but this reaction was unlike anything she'd encountered. It wasn't fear, at least not entirely. There was something deeper here, something that spoke of shared experience or memory. The late afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows across the forest floor. In this natural light, Lydia could see the stark contrast between Bailey's dark fur and the kitten's silver coats. The dog's breathing came in short, sharp bursts, her eyes darting between the kittens and some distant point only she could see. Lydia slowly knelt beside them, maintaining a careful distance. Her mind raced through possibilities, trying to make sense of Bailey's extreme reaction. The dog had been making such progress in recent weeks, gradually letting go of the fearful behaviors that marked her past trauma. But now, faced with these mysterious kittens, all that careful healing seemed to crumble. "What is it, Bailey?" she asked softly, noting how the dog's ears twitched at her voice, but her eyes remained fixed on the kittens. "What do you see in them?" The kittens, seemingly oblivious to Bailey's distress, continued their determined snuggling. Their behavior was equally puzzling. Feral kittens typically wouldn't approach a dog so fearlessly, let alone seek physical contact. Yet here they were, acting as if they'd found exactly what they'd been looking for. Making a quick decision, Lydia retrieved the emergency carrier she always kept in her backpack. She'd only intended to do a routine evening walk with Bailey, but years of animal rescue work had taught her to be prepared. The carrier was soft-sided, designed to be less threatening to traumatized animals. "Okay, little ones," she said, opening the carrier. "Let's get you somewhere safe." To her surprise, the kittens allowed themselves to be picked up with minimal fuss. They mewed softly but didn't struggle as she placed them in the carrier. Bailey immediately pressed against the mesh side, whining low in her throat. The walk back to the cabin was slow and tense. Bailey refused to move more than a few feet from the carrier, her body still trembling, her movements jerky and uncertain. Lydia found herself watching the dog more than the path, troubled by the intensity of her reaction. Inside the cabin, Lydia set up a temporary space for the kittens in her study. She arranged a small litter box, water bowl, and soft bedding, trying to make the space as welcoming as possible. Throughout her preparations, Bailey paced anxiously, her nails clicking against the hardwood floors. When Lydia finally released the kittens into their new space, Bailey's behavior became even more concerning. The dog lay down beside their bed. Her body curled protectively around the space, but her trembling hadn't stopped. Every few minutes, she would let out a soft whimper, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. The kittens, still surprisingly calm, immediately climbed over Bailey's legs and pressed themselves against her side. The contrast between their confident affection and Bailey's obvious distress created a scene that made Lydia's professional instincts scream that something was very wrong. She sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, notebook in hand, documenting every detail. The way Bailey's eyes would occasionally glaze over, as if seeing something from her past. The specific pitch of her whimpers, the unusual boldness of the kittens. Everything about this situation felt connected to something larger, something she couldn't yet see. Hours passed, and Bailey's state didn't improve. The dog remained in her protective position, but her anxiety seemed to be increasing rather than decreasing. She would occasionally start up suddenly, as if hearing a distant sound, only to settle back down when the kittens mewed in protest. Lydia found herself remembering what little she knew about Bailey's past. The rescue organization had found her in a raid on an illegal breeding operation, but the details had been sparse. Bailey's scars, both physical and emotional, told of prolonged captivity and likely abuse. But there had always been gaps in the story that didn't quite add up. Now, watching Bailey's visceral reaction to these mysterious kittens, Lydia felt those gaps taking on new significance. This wasn't just protective instinct or general trauma response. This was recognition, specific and painful. But how could Bailey have such a strong connection to these kittens? What had happened in that breeding facility that could explain this? As night fell, Lydia made up her bed on the couch, unwilling to leave Bailey alone in this state. The dog hadn't eaten her dinner, hadn't taken water, hadn't moved from her spot beside the kittens except for those occasional startled reactions. Her behavior was becoming increasingly concerning from a medical standpoint. The kittens, meanwhile, had eaten the food Lydia offered and used the litter box, showing none of the hesitation she would expect from feral cats. They moved with purpose, always returning to press against Bailey's side, as if they understood something about her pain that Lydia couldn't grasp. Around midnight, Bailey's trembling intensified. The dog pressed herself closer to the kittens, making a sound somewhere between a whimper and a moan. The kittens responded by climbing onto her back, their tiny paws kneading her fur as they purred loudly. Lydia sat up, watching the interaction with growing concern. She'd intended this to be temporary care, just long enough to find the kittens a proper home or rescue organization. But Bailey's extreme reaction and ongoing distress made it clear that this situation was far more complicated than a simple case of abandoned kittens. The scene before her spoke of shared trauma, of connections forged in dark places. Bailey's breakdown, coupled with the kitten's unusual behavior, painted a picture that made Lydia's stomach turn. Whatever had happened to Bailey in that breeding facility, these kittens somehow knew about it. They were connected to it. As she watched Bailey finally drift into an uneasy sleep, the kittens still pressed protectively against her, Lydia knew she couldn't treat this as a routine rescue case. Something larger was at play here, something that had brought these animals together for a reason. Bailey's visceral reaction demanded investigation, demanded understanding. The night grew deeper, and Lydia remained vigilant, watching over her, charges. Bailey's trembling had subsided somewhat in sleep, but her legs still twitched occasionally, chasing something in her dreams. The kittens stayed close, their presence seemingly both a comfort and a trigger for whatever memories plagued the troubled dog. In the quiet darkness, Lydia couldn't shake the feeling that she was witnessing only the beginning of something much larger. Bailey's breakdown had cracked open a door to a mystery she hadn't even known existed, and now she couldn't look away. These animals needed her, not just for food and shelter, but for understanding, for justice. Making a quick decision, Lydia retrieved the emergency carrier she always kept in her backpack. Though the sight of the carrier made Bailey whimper and back away slightly, the kittens allowed themselves to be gently placed inside. The moment felt heavy with significance. These weren't ordinary strays, and Bailey's reaction was far from typical. Back at her cabin, Lydia settled the kittens into a warm corner of her study, providing food, water, and a soft blanket. Bailey paced restlessly between the kittens and the door, her anxiety palpable in every movement. The dog's behavior triggered Lydia's professional instincts. There was a story here that needed uncovering. The next morning, after ensuring the kittens were comfortable, Lydia began her investigation. She started with a careful examination of the kittens themselves. Their unusual silver coats had a distinctive sheen she'd never seen before in domestic cats. Their faces were slightly elongated, with high cheekbones that hinted at exotic breeding. These weren't ordinary ferals. They were something special, possibly valuable. Lydia fired up her laptop and began researching. Hours slipped by as she dove deeper into local news reports and community forums. A pattern emerged that made her stomach tighten. Scattered reports of unusual animal movements in the hills, whispered concerns about exotic pets disappearing from homes in neighboring counties. "Look at this, Bailey," Lydia murmured, scrolling through a local news article. Bailey lifted her head from where she lay watching the kittens, her ears pricked forward. 3 reports in the last month about suspicious vehicles near the old Marshall Ranch. People claiming to hear strange animal sounds at night. The Marshall Ranch sat on the outskirts of town, a sprawling property that had changed hands several times in recent years. Its current owner kept to himself, running what he claimed was a small-scale breeding operation for specialty pets. Lydia had driven past it countless times without giving it much thought, but now. She picked up her phone and called her old friend at the local animal control office. "Hey, Mark, it's Lydia. I need to pick your brain about something." She kept her voice casual, but her fingers drummed nervously on her desk. "Have you heard anything about exotic animals being moved through the area? Maybe through Marshall Ranch?" There was a pause on the other end. "Funny you should ask," Mark replied, his voice lowered. "We've had some concerns about that place. Nothing concrete, but there's been talk. Some folks reported hearing unusual sounds at night, and we've had reports of strange vehicles coming and going at odd hours. Any official investigations?" "Nothing we could prove. Owner's got all his paperwork in order, claims he's just breeding designer cats. But," Mark hesitated, "between you and me, something doesn't feel right. We just can't get enough evidence to warrant a proper search." After hanging up, Lydia sat back in her chair, processing the information. Bailey had moved to the window, her posture tense as she stared out into the gathering dusk. The kittens mewed softly from their corner, drawing Lydia's attention back to them. They were the key to something larger. She was certain of it now. The next day, Lydia decided to take a closer look at Marshall Ranch. She drove slowly past the property, noting the high fences and security cameras. Bailey, who had insisted on coming along, began showing signs of distress as they approached. The closer they got to the ranch's perimeter, the more agitated she became. Suddenly, as they passed a particular section of fence, Bailey erupted into a frenzy of barking and whining. Her reaction was so violent that Lydia had to pull over. The dog pressed herself against the passenger door, her entire body trembling, eyes fixed on something beyond the fence. "Easy, girl," Lydia soothed, but her own heart was racing. Bailey's reaction wasn't random. This was triggering something specific, something from her past. The same kind of visceral response she'd shown when the kittens first appeared. Lydia pulled out her phone and began taking pictures of the area, careful to remain in her car. The ranch buildings were barely visible from this angle, but she could make out a series of low structures that looked like storage units or small barns. A security camera swiveled slowly on its mount, scanning the road. Over the next few days, Lydia pieced together more information. She discovered that several local veterinarians had refused to work with Marshall Ranch, citing vague concerns about their practices. Online forums mentioned similar silver-coated kittens being sold for extremely high prices, but the breed wasn't one she recognized from any legitimate registry. The connection between Bailey and the kittens nagged at her. Her dog's background was largely unknown. She'd been found in a raid on an illegal breeding operation 2 states over, but the details were sparse. Could there be a link? The timing seemed too convenient to be coincidence. Lydia created a detailed timeline marking the dates of reported suspicious activity against local animal control reports. A pattern emerged. Movements of vehicles and unusual sounds typically coincided with exotic pet sales in major cities several hundred miles away. She shared her findings with Mark, who agreed the situation warranted closer attention. "I'll see what I can dig up through official channels," he promised. "But be careful, Lydia. If there really is something illegal going on out there, these aren't people you want to cross." Bailey's behavior continued to tell its own story. While gentle with the kittens, she remained hyper-vigilant, especially at night. Sometimes she would stand at the window for hours, watching the darkness with an intensity that spoke of more than simple canine curiosity. She was standing guard, Lydia realized, protecting the kittens from something, or someone, she remembered all too well. The pieces were starting to fit together, forming a picture that grew more disturbing with each new detail. The kittens, mysterious appearance, Bailey's trauma, the suspicious activities at Marshall Ranch. They were all connected. Lydia felt certain she was uncovering the edges of something much larger and more sinister than simple pet breeding. As she reviewed her notes one evening, Bailey suddenly left her post by the kittens and came to press against Lydia's leg. The dog's eyes held a mixture of fear and determination that seemed almost human in its complexity. Looking down at her faithful companion, Lydia made a silent promise. Whatever secrets lay behind this mystery, she would uncover them. For Bailey's sake, for the kittens, and for all the other animals who might be suffering behind those high fences. The weight of her discovery settled heavily on her shoulders. She was no longer just a rehabilitator of traumatized animals. She had stumbled onto something that demanded action. The question was, what would that action cost her? And more importantly, what would it cost if she chose to look the other way? "Funny, you should ask," Mark replied, his voice lowered. "We've had some odd reports lately. Nothing concrete, mind you, but enough to raise eyebrows. Thing is, Lydia..." He paused, and she could hear him moving to a more private space. "We can't really look into it. Orders from above." Lydia's heart sank. "What do you mean, orders from above?" "Warren Kells. He's the owner now. Got friends in high places, county commissioner, sheriff's department, you name it. Every time we get a complaint, it gets buried before we can even start investigating." The name sparked recognition. Warren Kells was a fixture at local charity events, always photographed with influential people, his generous donations making headlines in the local paper. His public image was impeccable, a successful businessman giving back to the community. "Mark, I found something. Unusual," Lydia said carefully. "2 kittens, but they're not normal strays. They look exotic, and my rescue dog, Bailey." She described Bailey's strange behavior and the circumstances of finding the kittens. "Listen to me carefully, Lydia." Mark's voice dropped even lower. "Don't go poking around this. Kells has ways of making problems disappear. Last month, a rookie, animal control officer, tried to do a surprise inspection after some noise complaints. Next day, he was fired. Harassment charges appeared out of nowhere. Kid had to move out of state to find work. Lydia felt a chill run down her spine. She glanced at Bailey, who had pressed herself against the wall near the kittens, trembling. "These kittens mean something, Mark. And Bailey, the way she reacts. I think she might have come from there, too. Lydia, please, drop it. Whatever you think you found, let it go. Kells isn't someone you want to cross." After hanging up, Lydia sat in troubled silence. The kittens were curled up together, their unusual silver coats catching the afternoon light. Bailey hadn't left their side, her protective instinct warring with obvious fear. Determined to gather more information, Lydia spent the next few hours researching Warren Kells online. His public profile painted a picture of success and philanthropy. Major donations to the local police foundation, regular contributions to political campaigns, board positions on various civic organizations. But beneath the polished surface, there were whispers. Comments deleted from news articles, social media posts that disappeared. Former employees who seemed to vanish from the area entirely. The sun was setting when Lydia heard vehicles approaching on the road near her property. Bailey's head snapped up, her ears flat against her skull. The dog began to shake uncontrollably, trying to herd the kittens further into the corner of the room. Lydia peered through her curtains. 2 black SUVs with tinted windows drove past, slowly brake lights flashing as they nearly stopped in front of her driveway before continuing on. The message was clear. Someone knew she had been asking questions. That night, Lydia double-checked every lock and window. She moved the kittens into her bedroom, where Bailey curled around them protectively despite her obvious distress. The dog's reaction told her everything she needed to know. Bailey had encountered these people before, and the memory terrified her. As she lay in bed, listening to the strange chorus of Bailey's worried whimpers and the kittens purring, Lydia's mind raced. She had stumbled onto something much bigger and more dangerous than she'd initially thought. The kittens were evidence of something illegal happening at Marshall Ranch, but evidence that would be easy to dispose of. And Bailey. What had they done to her gentle rescue dog to cause such deep-seated trauma? The next morning, Lydia called the State Animal Welfare Office, careful to use her landline instead of her cell phone. The response was polite but dismissive. "We've received no official complaints about that property, ma'am. Mr. Kells runs a licensed breeding facility that passes all inspections without specific evidence of wrongdoing." "But I have evidence," Lydia insisted. "These kittens are... You certain they came from that property? Do you have documentation? Photos of illegal activities? Witnesses willing to testify?" Lydia fell silent. She had 2 mysterious kittens and a traumatized dog. Nothing that would stand up against Kells's army of lawyers and political connections. Later that day, she drove into town for supplies, taking a detour past Marshall Ranch. The property was impressive. Manicured lawns, pristine white fences, security cameras mounted discreetly at regular intervals. A sign at the gate proclaimed, "Private property, authorized personnel only," in authoritative black letters. As she slowed to study the layout, a truck pulled out behind her, following closer than necessary. Lydia recognized the driver, one of Kells's ranch hands who doubled as security. His face was expressionless as he tailed her for several miles before finally turning off. Back home, Lydia found an envelope in her mailbox. Inside was a formal letter from a law firm representing Warren Kells, expressing concerns about potential defamation and false allegations she might be spreading about their client's business interests. The threat was subtle but clear. Bailey met her at the door, agitated and clingy. The dog refused to let Lydia out of her sight, constantly checking on the kittens while maintaining physical contact with her human. It was as if Bailey sensed the growing danger and was trying to protect both her charges at once. Lydia sat at her kitchen table, the threatening letter spread out before her, and faced the harsh reality of her situation. Warren Kells had spent years building a fortress of influence around himself. He had money, connections, and the kind of power that came from knowing everyone's secrets. She was just one woman, living alone in the woods with nothing but her suspicions and 2 tiny kittens as proof. But as she watched Bailey tenderly nudging the kittens toward their food bowl, Lydia felt her resolve harden. Whatever was happening at Marshall Ranch had hurt Bailey deeply, and these kittens were somehow connected to it all. She couldn't walk away, not when there might be other animals suffering behind those pristine white fences. She would have to be smart about this, careful. Document everything. Build a case so solid that not even Kells's influence could bury it. But first, she needed to understand exactly what she was dealing with. The answer was right in front of her, in the unique features of the kittens and the deep-seated trauma of her beloved rescue dog. Looking at Bailey's scarred face and haunted eyes, Lydia whispered, "What did they do to you, girl? What are they hiding out there?" Bailey pressed against her leg, trembling but steadfast. The kittens mewed softly from their corner, their unusual eyes reflecting the fading daylight. Somewhere beyond her windows, in the gathering dusk, Lydia knew Warren Kells was probably already planning his next move. She would have to be ready. The weight of her discovery settled over her like a heavy blanket. This wasn't just about saving 2 mysterious kittens anymore. She had stumbled onto something much darker, a secret protected by money and influence, enforced by threats and ruined lives. And now she had to decide, back away and stay safe, or fight back and risk everything. Bailey's warm presence against her leg gave her the answer. Some battles were worth the risk, especially when innocent lives hung in the balance. Tomorrow, she would begin gathering evidence, but tonight she would hold her small family close and prepare for the storm she knew was coming. Lydia's hands trembled as she scrolled through her phone contacts. The weight of what she'd discovered felt crushing in its isolation. Bailey paced anxiously near the window, her nails clicking against the hardwood floor, while the kittens watched from their makeshift bed with those unnaturally bright eyes. There was only one person she could think of who might understand and believe her: Marcus Hale. They'd worked together years ago when she consulted on animal behavior cases for law enforcement. He'd been different from the other investigators, principled to a fault even when it cost him. She pressed the call button before she could second-guess herself. The phone rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. Hale speaking. "Marcus? It's Lydia Markham." There was a pause, then a warmth entered his voice. "Lydia? Been what? 4 years?" "5, she corrected, smiling, despite her anxiety. "How are you?" "Still kicking. Retirement suits me fine, though my garden could use some work." "But you didn't call to check on my tomatoes, did you?" Lydia took a deep breath. "No. I need your help, Marcus. I've stumbled onto something bad, and the local authorities are compromised." The line went quiet for a moment. When Marcus spoke again, his voice had that familiar, focused edge she remembered from their cases together. "Tell me everything." For the next 20 minutes, Lydia detailed her discoveries. The mysterious kittens, Bailey's reactions, Warren Kells's operation, and the warning signs of corruption. Marcus listened without interruption, only occasionally asking for clarification. "Warren Kells," he finally said, the name coming out like something bitter. "I know him. Or know of him. He was on my radar back before they forced me into retirement. Nothing concrete. But there were patterns. Animals disappearing. Exotic pets showing up in rich people's homes with suspicious paperwork. But every time we got close, the investigation disappeared," Lydia finished, "along with careers, reputations, sometimes whole families having to relocate." Marcus sighed heavily. "You're right about one thing. Local law enforcement won't help. Kells has them in his pocket along with half the county officials." "Will you help me?" Lydia asked. her voice smaller than she intended. There was a long pause. "You understand what you're asking? Going against Kells. It won't be safe. He's not just some corrupt businessman. He's dangerous." "I know. But these animals, Marcus, you should see Bailey. Whatever happened to her there?" Lydia watched as Bailey pressed herself against the wall, eyes fixed on the kittens. "I can't. Just walk away." Another pause, shorter this time. "Where are you living now?" "A cabin, out past Miller's Creek. End of Oakwood Road." "Give me 3 hours. Don't talk to anyone else. Don't go anywhere. And Lydia, watch your back." The next 3 hours were among the longest of Lydia's life. She double-checked her security cameras, made sure all her doors and windows were locked, and kept Bailey close. The dog's anxiety was contagious, her ears constantly swiveling toward every small sound from outside. Just after 8 o'clock, headlights swept across her front windows. Bailey tensed, but didn't show the same fear she had when the black SUVs passed. Lydia checked her security camera feed. A weathered pickup truck had pulled into her driveway. Marcus looked older than she remembered. His hair had gone fully gray, and he moved with a slight limp as he approached her front door. But his eyes were sharp as ever when she let him in, taking in everything with a detective's practiced sweep. "Nice place," he said, setting down a heavy duffel bag. "Defensible. Good sight lines. Though you might want better locks on those back windows. It's good to see you, Marcus." He smiled, some of the professional assessment falling away. "You too, kid. Now show me what we're dealing with." Lydia led him to where the kittens were sleeping, Bailey hovering nearby. Marcus knelt carefully, his knee cracking slightly, and examined them without touching. "Definitely not ordinary cats," he murmured. "Bengal mix, maybe, but there's something else. Professional breeding operation for sure." He turned his attention to Bailey, who regarded him warily. "And you, girl, you've seen some things, haven't you?" Bailey whined softly, pressing closer, to the kittens. Marcus stood with a grunt. "We need evidence. Real, documented proof that can't be buried or explained away. Photos and video aren't enough. Kells's lawyers would tie that up in court forever. We need paper trails, witnesses, physical evidence." "I think Bailey might be able to help with that," Lydia said. "She's been trying to show me something. Every walk, she pulls toward the woods behind Kells's property. I haven't let her get too close, but now you have backup," Marcus finished. He opened his duffel bag, pulling out professional-grade cameras, a tablet, and what looked like surveillance equipment. "When does she usually want to go?" "After dark." "Around 9 or 10. Marcus checked his watch. "Perfect. Give her a chance to settle, then we'll follow her lead. Meanwhile, let me show you how to document everything properly. Chain of evidence matters. We need to do this right." For the next hour, Marcus walked Lydia through the basics of evidence collection and documentation. He showed her how to photograph items with proper scale markers, how to log GPS coordinates, and how to maintain records that would hold up in court. At 9:30, Bailey began pacing near the door, her usual signal. Marcus packed a small bag, with cameras and other equipment, then handed Lydia a flashlight and what looked like a taser. "Just in case," he said quietly. "Kells employs private security. They patrol the woods sometimes. The night was clear but moonless as they followed Bailey into the forest. The dog moved with purpose, stopping frequently to ensure they were following. Marcus limped slightly but kept pace, his movements almost silent despite his injury. After 20 minutes, Bailey led them to a clearing Lydia hadn't seen before. The dog's demeanor changed immediately, ears flat, tail tucked, body low to the ground. She circled the area, whining softly. Marcus swept his flashlight methodically across the ground. "There," he said softly, pointing to a patch of disturbed earth. "Recent activity. Within the last week." They approached carefully. As Marcus's light played across the area, Lydia's breath caught. Half buried in the dirt were pieces of metal, cage fragments, heavy-duty locks, and what looked horrifyingly like veterinary equipment. "Document everything," Marcus instructed, his voice tight. "Every piece, every position." He knelt, examining dark stains on some of the metal. Blood. Multiple types. They've been disposing of evidence here. For the next hour, they carefully photographed and logged every item they found. Marcus took samples of the stained earth and metal, storing them in evidence bags with meticulous labels. Bailey stayed at the edge of the clearing, trembling but refusing to leave. "This is just the surface," Marcus said finally, straightening with a wince. "They've been using this spot for quick disposal, but there will be more. Probably multiple. Sites." He looked at Bailey with newfound respect. She knew. She remembered. "Will it be enough?" Lydia asked, watching Bailey's continuous nervous scanning of the woods. "It's a start. We can prove illegal disposal of veterinary waste at minimum, and these cage parts—" He held up a twisted piece of metal. "Custom work. Traceable. But we need more." A twig snapped in the darkness beyond the clearing. Bailey went rigid, a low growl building in her throat. Marcus immediately killed his flashlight, pulling Lydia behind a large oak tree. Voices carried faintly through the trees. At least 2 men and the sound of heavy equipment being moved. Marcus pressed a finger to his lips, then pointed back the way they'd come. Silently, they retreated, Bailey staying close to their heels. They didn't speak until they were safely back in Lydia's cabin, doors locked and curtains drawn. Bailey immediately went to check on the kittens who had slept through their absence. "That was close," Marcus said, laying out their collected evidence on Lydia's kitchen table. "They're destroying evidence. They must know someone's investigating." "What do we do now?" Marcus began carefully packaging the samples and photos. "Now, we build our case. Carefully, quietly, and we watch our backs." He looked at her seriously. "Are you sure about this, Lydia? There's no shame in walking away. I can take the kittens, get them somewhere safe." Lydia watched Bailey, who had curled protectively around the sleeping kittens. The dog's eyes met hers, and in them she saw the same determination she felt. "I'm sure," she said firmly. "Whatever Kells is doing, it stops here." Marcus nodded, a grim smile touching his weathered face. "Then we'd better get to work. But first, let's talk about securing this place properly. You're in this fight now, and Kells, he fights dirty." The acrid smell of smoke woke Lydia at 3:15 in the morning. Bailey's urgent barking had her on her feet before she was fully awake. Through her bedroom window, she saw the orange glow lighting up the night sky. The Hendersons' old barn, just a quarter-mile from her property, was engulfed in flames. She grabbed her phone, dialing 911 as she ran outside. Bailey stayed behind, guarding the kittens. Fire trucks arrived too late to save the structure. As Lydia watched the barn collapse in on itself, a deputy approached her, holding out a crumpled piece of paper found nailed to a nearby fence post. "Next time won't be empty," Lydia read aloud, her hands shaking. The message was typed, no fingerprints to trace. Marcus arrived within the hour, his face grim as he surveyed the smoking ruins. "This is how it starts," he said quietly. "First, the warnings, then escalation. I've seen his pattern before." Back inside her cabin, Lydia paced while Marcus made calls to his old contacts. Bailey watched them both, the kittens tucked safely behind her on their bed. "Got something?" Marcus said finally, hanging up his phone. "An old colleague at the genetic research facility in Madison. She remembers Kells's name coming up in connection with some controversial breeding programs. Says she'll send us what she has." The files arrived by encrypted email 2 hours later. As they read through them, the horrible truth emerged. Kells hadn't just been breeding exotic animals. He'd been experimenting with cross-species surrogacy, using larger animals to carry rare breed pregnancies. "Look at these dates," Marcus pointed to a section of data. Bailey's intake records at the shelter match exactly with when this program was shut down. And these genetic markers. He looked at the kittens, then at Bailey. They used her. She was a surrogate. Lydia felt sick. She watched Bailey, who hadn't left the kittens' side since they'd found them. The dog's protective behavior, her immediate recognition, her trauma around cages. It all made terrible sense. That's why she recognized them, Lydia whispered. They're literally her babies. She carried them. And somehow they found their way back to her, Marcus added. This is the proof we needed. Kells isn't just smuggling animals. He's running an illegal genetic experimentation operation. The question is, who's buying these designer breeds? Bailey moved closer to the kittens, her eyes never leaving Lydia's face. In them, Lydia saw not just fear of the past, but fierce determination to protect what was hers. The threat against. Her property had only strengthened Lydia's resolve. Kells hadn't just hurt animals. He'd violated the very essence of nature itself. Lydia sat at her kitchen table, the damning evidence spread before her in the early morning light. Each document felt heavier than the last as the full scope of Kells's operation became clear. The kittens weren't just rare, they were impossible. Genetic reports showed traces of wildcat DNA spliced with domestic breeds, creating exotic-looking hybrids that wealthy collectors would pay fortunes to own. These little ones, she said softly, watching the kittens play near Bailey's protective form. They're living proof of his illegal breeding program. Her voice cracked with emotion as she stroked Bailey's head. No wonder you were so traumatized. Sweet girl, what they put you through. Marcus stood by the window, his posture tense. We've got company, he announced grimly. Black SUV parked at the end of your drive. They're not even trying to be subtle anymore. Lydia joined him at the window. The vehicle's tinted windows revealed nothing, but its message was clear. Kells was watching her every move. He knows we have proof, she said. Which means we need to move fast, Marcus replied, pulling out his phone. I have a contact at the Wild Spirit Sanctuary in Colorado. They specialize in hybrid cats and have top-notch security. The kittens would be safe there. As they discussed logistics, Lydia noticed more vehicles appearing on the quiet road past her property. Kells was tightening the net around them. Her heart raced, but her voice remained steady as she made her decision. We'll need to split up, she said, already gathering supplies. They'll expect us to travel together. I'll take the main road with empty carriers. Let them chase me. You take Bailey and the kittens through the back trails. Marcus nodded, understanding. The risk she was taking. You'll be directly in their sights. Good, Lydia replied, her jaw set with determination. The longer they focus on me, the better chance you have of getting the kittens to safety. She knelt beside Bailey, who watched her with worried eyes. I promise to protect you and your babies, she whispered. And I will, no matter what it costs me. The surveillance vehicles had multiplied to 3 by noon. Lydia could feel their eyes on her as she loaded empty carriers into her truck, making a show of preparation. Her hands trembled slightly, but her resolve was ironclad. These kittens represented more than just animals in need. They were living proof of cruelty masquerading as science of greed destroying the natural order. She would see them safe, even if it meant putting herself directly in Kells's crosshairs. Dark clouds rolled across the evening sky as Lydia and Marcus crouched behind a fallen log at the edge of Kells's property. Thunder rumbled in the distance, promising a storm that would help mask their movements. Bailey pressed close to Lydia's side, trembling but determined, while the kittens remained safely hidden in padded backpacks. Security cameras cover the main gates, Marcus whispered, pointing to the blinking red lights. But there's a blind spot near the old fence line where the trees have grown too thick. Lydia nodded, her heart pounding. The ranch sprawled before them, a maze of buildings and paddocks. Somewhere in there lay the proof they needed, the breeding facility where Bailey had been held. Lightning flashed, illuminating the grounds in stark white before plunging them back into darkness. "Now," Marcus urged as the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. They moved swiftly through the underbrush, Bailey leading the way with uncanny precision. The dog's ears were flat against her head, but she pressed forward, guided by memories she couldn't forget. The rain intensified, providing cover as they slipped through the gap in the fence. Keeping to the shadows, they navigated between outbuildings. Bailey suddenly stopped, her whole body going rigid. Before them stood a long, low building with heavy metal doors, unmarked and unremarkable, except for the sophisticated security panel beside the entrance. "This is it," Lydia breathed, recognizing the significance of Bailey's reaction. Marcus made quick work of the lock, his experience evident in his efficient movements. The door opened with a soft click, revealing a corridor lined with cages. The antiseptic smell hit them immediately, clinical and wrong in what was supposed to be a cattle ranch. Bailey whimpered, pressing herself against the wall. "Oh, Bailey," Lydia murmured, her heart breaking as she watched the dog's trauma resurface. In the dim emergency lighting, she could see one cage that seemed to affect Bailey more than the others. The dog stood frozen, staring at it with such intensity that Lydia had to fight back tears. Thunder crashed overhead as they documented everything with their phones. The specialized breeding equipment, the genetic testing machinery, the carefully labeled specimens. Each photo was damning evidence of Kells's illegal operation. A security light suddenly flooded the compound outside, casting long shadows through the windows. Voices approached, sharp and urgent over the sound of the storm. They were running, out of time. Bailey remained paralyzed, her eyes fixed on that terrible cage where she had once been imprisoned. "We need to move," Marcus urged, but Bailey wouldn't budge. The kittens mewed softly from their backpacks, and something in their sound seemed to break through Bailey's fear. She turned to Lydia with renewed purpose, as if remembering why they had come. The shouts grew closer as rain hammered against the metal roof. Lydia and Marcus rushed toward the back exit, but flashlight beams suddenly cut through the darkness ahead of them. They were trapped. "Split up!" Marcus hissed, gesturing toward different doors. "I'll draw them off!" Lydia burst out into the storm, clutching the backpack with the kittens close to her chest. Bailey ran beside her, both of them drenched within. Seconds. Behind them, angry voices echoed through the rain. "There she is!" someone shouted. Footsteps splashed through puddles, gaining on them. The ground had turned treacherous, mud sucking at Lydia's boots as she ran. Lightning cracked overhead, illuminating the flooded pasture ahead. She slipped, catching herself on a fence post as her pursuers closed in. 3 of Kells's men emerged from the darkness, their faces twisted with menace. Lydia backed away, but her heel hit an embankment. She was cornered, with nowhere left to. "Run! Hand over the cats!" one man demanded, advancing through the mud. Bailey, who had been trembling beside Lydia, suddenly transformed. The fear in her eyes gave way to fierce determination. With a deep growl that rose above the storm, she launched herself between Lydia and the attackers. The men hesitated, faced with 80 pounds of protective German shepherd. Bailey's teeth gleamed in the lightning, her protective instinct overcoming years of trauma. When one man reached for Lydia, Bailey struck like a thunderbolt, knocking him into the mud. From somewhere in the darkness came the sound of Marcus's voice. "Everything on camera, gentlemen. Your boss might want to know he's being filmed assaulting a woman on his illegal breeding grounds." The beam of Marcus's flashlight revealed his phone held high, recording everything. The men froze, suddenly aware of how this would look to law enforcement. Bailey stood her ground, rain streaming off her fur, no longer the frightened rescue dog, but a mother protecting her family. The kittens mewed from the safety of the backpack, and Bailey's growl deepened. No one would hurt them, not ever again. The next morning dawned clear and bright, washing away the chaos of the night. Lydia sat on her porch, watching as police cars and animal control vehicles swarmed Kels's property. Marcus's video evidence, combined with the rescued kittens and documentation they'd gathered, had created an ironclad case that not even Kels's influence could overcome. "They found 17 more exotic cats," Marcus reported, walking up the steps to join her, "plus records of all the illegal breeding. Kels is finished." His weathered face broke into a satisfied smile. Sometimes justice just needs a little help finding its way. Inside the cabin, Bailey lay curled on her bed, the two kittens snuggled against her belly. The sight brought tears to Lydia's eyes, not of sadness this time, but of healing. The trembling, traumatized dog who had first led her to the kittens had transformed into their fierce protector, finding her courage when it mattered most. "You knew all along, didn't you?" Lydia whispered to Bailey, stroking her head. "You needed to save them because you remembered." Bailey's tail thumped softly against the floor, her eyes peaceful for the first time since Lydia had known her. The terror of the previous night felt distant now, replaced by a profound sense of accomplishment. Lydia had discovered strength she never knew she possessed, inspired by Bailey's own journey from victim to hero. Together, they had faced down evil and emerged victorious, not just saving the kittens, but bringing down an entire network of cruelty. "We did it, girl," Lydia murmured, as Bailey gently nuzzled one of the sleeping kittens. "We really did it. Thank you for watching. Stories like this remind us who we are. If something touched your heart, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story that just might stay.